Because of the altitude, even though the cars are running very big wings, you actually have Monza levels of downforce.
Hello and welcome to this Akkodis race debrief. My name's Jodi, and joining us today we have team representative Bradley Lord. He's here to answer your questions from the Mexico City Grand Prix. I hear that you're fresh off the plane from Mexico, so how has the weekend been overall?
It was a decent weekend. We were competitive, we were right in the mix, qualified obviously both cars in the top six, but then sadly our least competitive session and least rewarding one was the one that counted most, which was the race.
And we saw some drivers missing out on FP1 as we had so many rookies lining up for the session. So what makes Mexico City so popular to utilise that session for a rookie?
It was funny, I was having dinner with Crofty from Sky F1 on Thursday night and he was rather daunted at the number of new names he needed to remember for FP1. 9 drivers, I think it was, including our own Fred Vesti, that were subbed in for one of the rookie sessions. The reason really is the circuit is very, very dusty in Mexico traditionally, so not a super useful session in FP1 for learning for the rest of the weekend. So teams use it as one of the weekends to cover off the sort of 2 rookie sessions that need to be sacrificed by race drivers who are not in their own rookie season. So Kimi obviously was permitted to take part, George stepped away for Fred, and when you count through the calendar, you look at the number of sprint races, the number of events where really track time is absolutely crucial. Mexico is one of the ones that lends itself, and indeed, I think in the top 4 on Sunday, only one of those drivers had actually taken part in FP1, so it showed it wasn't too much of a hindrance.
And then how did Fred get on then in that session? Because it's his second time in the W16.
Yeah, second time in the W16 this year, second time also doing FP1 at Mexico. He'd had an outing a couple of years ago as well. So it was a really solid session, a good step forward from Bahrain. Unfortunately, he just missed the first lap on the soft tyre when he got the sort of lower fuel run on the softer compound, but was able to make good on that on his second lap, which was really strong, and then did a very useful and positive long run for us as well. So really important session for him. He's actually in the mule car as well this week, doing some 2026 tyre testing for Pirelli that then will enable him to come back here to the sim, I think on Thursday, and correlate the simulator as well. So he's playing a really important role behind the scenes.
And then if we look at the race activity, we heard a lot of radio chatter, shall we say, when we were leading up to looking at swapping the positions of the drivers, George and Kimi. So why did we choose the moment that we did to make that swap?
It was a really tricky situation. We had Kimi driving in a way to manage his tyres, managing to a one stop and doing exactly what was being asked of him. George obviously under pressure from Piastri, closing up on Kimi and very much feeling that squeeze between Kimi in front, who was managing everything quite carefully, waiting for either Bearman's tyres to drop off in front to be able to take advantage of that, or for an undercut if we were to convert to a 2-stop, because it was right on the limit. George obviously coming up from behind, closing that gap, and then in the dirty air, using more of his tyres because of that, and also feeling that he had pace to get past. So it did take a while to figure that out, because we were initially a team, we would let our drivers race, and that's what our racing intent calls for. We did eventually decide to swap, and I think in hindsight, regardless of whether we decided to hold position or swap, it was the delay that was the thing that didn't work out for us. By the time George was past, his tyres were past their best and he couldn't get past Bearman. Equally, later in the race on fresh tyres, once he'd made the second stop, he had another chance to attack and was unable to make the move stick then either. So I think on the day, we weren't quite quick enough to make that happen. It was very difficult to overtake in Mexico with the low downforce, very difficult with the dirty air phenomenon that seems more penalising now than at any part of these rules since 2022, and so it was a tricky situation. Probably didn't get everything right in how we managed it, and the lesson is really that we should have been more decisive, either in asking to hold position or swapping the positions rather than waiting the time we did.
I mean, we did see Bearman have an absolutely fantastic race for himself. So you said waiting for his tyres drop off, and obviously George burnt through his. So was that the reason why he couldn't get that overtake done on Bearman?
In the second stint, yes. In the third stint, I think it simply shows that in Mexico, it is a circuit where the tyres do overheat in traffic. And so it is very, very difficult to pass. We saw really the only driver making progress in the top 5 or 6 was Piastri, and the McLaren had a pace advantage of between 3 and 4 tenths of a second per lap over the other front-running cars in Mexico. The rest of us were within a gap of literally hundredths of a second, probably a tenth spread between the fastest Ferrari and the slowest car in that pack. So when the differentials are that small, you're either relying on mistakes or pit stops, or teams simply pushing the tyre life a bit too far and then hitting what's called the cliff and suffering a dramatic loss in performance. But I mean, Bearman and Haas managed everything incredibly well and, put in a fantastic drive to P4.
And looking at how tricky it can be to get the overtake done at Mexico City, is it because of the tyre degradation there, or is it more to do, we saw so many DRS trains developing as well?
There are two factors really that are crucial, maybe three. The first is because of the altitude. Even though the cars are running very big wings, you actually have Monza levels of downforce. And that means, when you look at the racing in Monza, with the relatively low DRS effect that you get with the cars and how much more delicate they are to drive on low downforce, that makes overtaking fundamentally more difficult. Added to that is that the altitude means that brake cooling and engine cooling is always a challenge. So running close up behind other cars, further costs you cooling capacity both for the engine and the brakes, and that makes that more difficult to do. So drivers generally only get 1 or 2 laps of being able to follow very closely before they need to back off to keep temperatures under control. And then thirdly, it's the fact that I alluded to earlier, that the tyres, when you're following, it's a tarmac that means the tyres overheat quite quickly. So every following driver is managing tyre overheating, therefore they are sliding more, therefore they're taking more out of the tyre. And so following is more penalising than it might be at some other circuits. So it's all that combination. And the propensity then to create DRS trains means it's very difficult to make progress through a pack of 2 or 3 cars.
And with all that in mind, then looking at the strategy that we chose, was it always going to be the plan that we were going to do a 2-stop strategy, or was it more that we were reacting to the cars in front coming in for the second time?
The base plan we went into the race with was a 1-stop, based on the way degradation usually falls between practice and the race. As the race unfolded, it became clear that degradation was higher than we'd expected, and it became a very, very marginal call between a 1-stop and a 2-stop. And we decided to pull the trigger on the 2-stop. I think Kimi was actually the second car to do so, followed into the pits by Piastri and Hamilton on the lap that he pitted. Unfortunately, we stopped a little long, and so it was a slow stop that cost us the position to Piastri. But the intention for doing that was to box in some of the cars up ahead and to give both drivers fresh tyres, because we could see that the performance was dropping away on the medium. Also because both of them had found themselves at one point or another running in dirty air and defending from Piastri as well.
And we've got a little break now, a week off until we go to Brazil. So what are we going to focus on? What's going to be the priority to regain momentum as we carry on that battle for P2 in the Constructors' Championship?
Well, it's very much a week off in name only. It's a week on here at both Brackley and in Brixworth as well. Obviously, the main focus in the factories is now very much on 2026, and both sites are absolutely flat out with development, with production for next year's car and next year's power unit too. In terms of this season, we know that we've got a race to maximise the package we've got. We know as well that is a package good enough to be finishing on the podium at every event if we get everything right, if we have clean first corners, good starts, clean lap 1, and things fall our way. And I think that didn't happen in Mexico. So the focus for Brazil is really getting the starting setup in the right place. It's a sprint weekend. We've only got 1 hour of practice, and then we're straight into sprint qualifying on Friday afternoon. So you need to hit the ground running. We managed that pretty successfully in Austin. If you remember, George was, I think, 3rd or 4th on the grid for the sprint and then finished 2nd. So we've had good results this year in sprint weekends so far. We need to capitalise on that, make sure Kimi's up there in the top 5, top 6 as well, and able to bring his contribution to the point scoring, and then hopefully again build some more advantage in that fight for P2. We've fallen just behind Ferrari, and we know it's going to be nail-bitingly close until the final lap in Abu Dhabi, but that's what every single team member is focused on achieving.